Okay, let's give it like 2 more minutes. There's almost 50 people here. I've seen most of the speakers. Yeah, so let's wait 2 minutes more. Whoever's going to show up, you can see everything later on. Okay, I think we are not going to prolong this. Let's slowly start. I see basically most of our speakers already here. I hope just one speaker who didn't show up yet will be with us later, but I think we can go. So hello everyone. Firstly, just some announcement and technical issues. So every month we organized, as the European Network for Solidarity with Ukraine, a so-called, what we call a global meeting, where the idea is to exchange information about the activities of left-wing, progressive, trade unionist, feminist, solidarity groups with Ukraine, about the situation in Ukraine, and hopefully also create a space to discuss what progressive solidarity with Ukraine looks in different regions, parts of the world. So far we have met 6 times in this format. We have discussions about the situation in India, in Brazil, and Eastern Europe, and most recently in the region of East Asia and Pacific. So usually we manage to bring like 50 to 100 people at each of these meetings. As you already seen, the meeting will be recorded. We'll put that on the YouTube channel soon, so you can also use it for your own purposes in your networks. So we understand that some of you, like such as activists coming from some autocratic countries, sometimes don't want to reveal your faces. That's perfectly okay with us. If you don't want to participate, if you want to participate in the discussion anonymously, you don't have to turn on your camera. As a rule, our meetings are held in English with simultaneous translation into French, occasionally also Spanish. We are testing a new option, captations, with many more language options, but you can try it, of course, but I think the interpretation would be the better option. So our panelists will speak first, then we would welcome some comments from our Ukrainian comrades and friends. We want to know more about the situation in Africa, but this meeting is also Ukraine orientated and Ukrainian centric, let's call it like that. So also the view of our comrades from Ukraine would be very useful. If we have time, we look forward for the participation of other people from the audience. You can ask questions, you can intervene in the discussion. I think we will have pretty big amount of time to use that for the discussion questions to our panelists. At the end of the meeting, there will be space to inform participants about all the actions, event, meetings, activities your groups are organizing related to solidarity with Ukraine, not just in Africa. If you are not speaking, just please mute yourself. If anyone wants to be kept informed about the future global meetings, please leave your email in the chat. We'll inform you about all the future meetings. As I said, we do this meetings in this format every month. The next one will be about Ukraine solidarity and Middle East. So I think also a quite interesting one. I will post also the information about the organizer of the meeting, so Ensu, and about the videos from the previous meeting in the chat. So you can look at this. And feel free, if anyone wants to, after our participants end their speeches, if anyone wants to take part in the discussion, you can use the chat. We encourage you to use the chat or use the raise your hand function. So I think that's basically it. There's plenty to discuss about the Africa. There's the story about the participation of South Africa in the BRICS, which also is used as a tool for Russia imperialism. There's the activities of Wagner Group in Africa. There's the situation related to the Polish-Belarusian border, where we have refugees also from Africa trying to get to Poland, and it is also related to what's happening in Ukraine. There is also what's happening in Sudan. So I'm very, very happy that we have a speaker from Sudan, the Sudanese activist, today with us. So Ayman, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself and
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Iman Saifuddin, and I'm a human rights activist. Plus, I'm working as a lecturer at the University of Hanover at the Institute of Didactic Geography. I am active very much in the issue of Darfur and for refugees and internally displaced people and women and children. I would make my speech very short, and I would prefer to get the reactions and questions from the audience, if anything special that they would like to know or clarify. First, I would like to pay my sincere appreciation to the European Network for Solidarity with the Ukraine for inviting me to this meeting. And I would like to express my sincere solidarity with the people of Ukraine, and as well to convey the solidarity of the entire Sudanese people. I would like to highlight the situation in Sudan with a refer to 24th February 2022, when the head of the Rapid Support Force militia, which we know as Janjaweed militia, General Hemeti, met with Vladimir Putin, who made the statement to support the invasion of Ukraine. I would like to emphasize that this statement does not represent the people of Sudan. The war ties have been started even earlier, when the ousted Bashir met with Vladimir Putin in Sochi 2017 and asked for protection and give permission to the Wagner Group to start smuggle the Sudanese gold to Russia to prepare for the war. And Wagner have been using Sudan as a platform to act on many other African countries in the region. The conflict between General al-Burhan and the Sudanese armed force leader and Hemeti, the leader of the Rapid Support Force militia, however, is much bigger than the two personalities at its heart. Indeed, there is a third character in this violent tragedy, somebody who's watching us from far away. Vladimir Putin already exercised influence across much of the arid Sahel through the Wagner Group, although best known for its current activity in Ukraine. Wagner is also active in a number of African states, including Burkina Faso, Mali, Chad, and Libya. This is conflict. In this conflict, Hemeti is a man who could add Sudan, or he already added Sudan to the list, with the main goal of finding easy way to African resources through exchange of existing government with a militia rule systems in our country. It's a rule of the jungle. The investigation carried out or revealed by CNN that it reveals that Russian aircraft had been flying Sudanese gold out of the country to the Syrian port of Latakia, where the Russian has major air base with assistance of Marawi Gold, a subsidiary of M Investment, owned by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, who has been assisted by top Sudanese officials who managed to smuggle an enormous amount of $13.4 billion gold. In many countries, greed and competition of power and resources has led to the ongoing escalation between militia and the army, crushing down the civilians, as it happened now in my country. On 15th April, the militia started the war in Sudan, fighting the National Armed Force with help of the Wagner militiamen coming from and other militia that are coming from other African countries. And some countries are backing the militia to occupy Sudan. The capital city of Khartoum was crushed down by encroached earth policy. Hospitals and churches were taken by militia and used as barracks and as military bases. The situation on the ground is there. 700 people were killed, 190 of them were children, 600 were injured, 6,000 were injured, and many people reported missing, more than 1 million displaced, and 840,000 find their way to the other cities. But 250,000 crossed the borders to the neighboring countries, and the majority were left to find their destiny, facing their situation of lack of food, water, and medical services. Most of the hospitals are out of service, and many of the medical personnel were killed during work. Rape of women were reported in Khartoum and as well persisted to happen in Darfur, beside reports of child soldiers in the militia of Rapid Support Force. On the 5th week of the war, a ceasefire agreement were signed in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, started to be enacted last night. Nevertheless, civilians reported some clashes in different areas of the capital, and a statement made by the militia leader on Twitter asked his soldiers to fight until the last soldier. This reveals the emptiness of the ceasefire agreement that was seriously needed for the humanitarian aid and medical assistance to reach the affected people of Sudan. My dear comrade, activists, and freedom fighters, I strongly believe on our struggle to build our country on the basis of democracy and the rule of law, a new state that respects us and foster the culture of peace, democracy, and sustainability. Our march for democracy will continue, and our consistent demand of civil rule will win. Thank you so much for having me here, and I welcome your questions and remarks.
Thank you very much. I think we'll proceed that we'll get all the speeches, and then hopefully people who want to have a discussion or raise a question can do that. So from Sudan, we'll go to South Africa. As far as I see, we got two representatives of South Africa today, both under the name of Patrick Bond, but I think it's kind of a mistake. There's we have Desmond Dessa today with us and Patrick Bond as well. So maybe Desmond would like to start, please.
Well, I was under the impression that Patrick would do the talking. So, Patrick, you want to start because your favorite.
You can just proceed as you want. If Patrick wants to start, please.
Thanks.
Yeah, go for it, Des. So there's the name there is Desmond Desaab. Des, may I introduce you as the coordinator of the South Durban Community Environmental Alliance. And Durban is a critical city, and Des won the Goldman Prize as the leading environmentalist in Africa for 2014, but also has been crucial for organizing protests against the war games and against Putin's invasion.
So thanks, Patrick. So yes, we've been working with Ukrainians in Durban around the invasion. And, you know, a number of us, we call it the Durban Coalition, have been working on this since the war started. And we are concerned about citizens being killed. No one can justify a war, and Putin himself has been a bully. We know about these atrocities in Syria, but also Afghanistan, also in Africa, where he's been party to a number of problems on the continent. And so when this happened, we got together and we had a number of meetings, initially small protests, but we've had some big protests this year on the anniversary of the war starting in the Ukraine. And since then, people have called on that we should not be sitting out quiet and continue to speak up against a bully like Putin, like we've spoken up against the apartheid regime. People have been saying, wow, we should not allow Putin here. And we were preparing for him to come to Durban because he's part of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. We had huge marches in Durban as part of the BRICS because we realized then that not only is Russia involved, but also China and other countries as well. And our country has been very quiet and silent about the war in Ukraine. In fact, by their silence, they've been supporting the the Russian government. And last year, our deputy president of South Africa, who was riddled with scandals, went to Russia and spent some time in Russia. So we're fully aware of it, and we were planning some actions in August around Putin's visit to Durban. Fortunately, it doesn't look like he'll come here. But if he does, we will ensure that we challenge him and tell him to go back to Russia. We that have been oppressed in the past understand fully how the Ukrainians feel about the oppression now by the Russian regime. And so we will not sit quietly or stand aside and allow the Russians to continue to do what they're doing. We will stand up and not allow him here in South Africa. And if he does go to some of the areas in South Africa, there's talk of arresting him, because we are to the international court. We're a signatory to the international court. And so people are waiting to see if he does set foot in South Africa, and how can he be arrested? Or how can they challenge the constitutional court in South Africa so that Putin can be held accountable and arrested? So Patrick is in that side of the world in Johannesburg. Maybe he'll give an update of what's going on there, how the preparations are going. But certainly from our side, we will do something in Durban to bring people out to act against while Putin is here, to make enough noise that he shouldn't stay here in South Africa. He's not needed here. So we'll challenge that. I'll leave it to you then, Patrick.
Okay, thanks, Comrade Des. So I'm an academic. I'm at the University of Johannesburg. I direct the Center for Social Change. And we're also possibly going to be joined by Micah Reddy, who's one of our leading investigative journalists who's looked into some of the networks that provide the basis for what sometimes is called a campist or anti-imperialist perspective, particularly favoring China and by implication relatively pro-Putin. So that's a big problem. I'm hoping Micah Reddy joins us to describe if it's one that we all need to compare notes on. I'll just pick up two parts of what Des described. The BRICS will be held in the city, August 22 to 24. We have a BRICS from below network, and we'll be doing things that will highlight the war and many other aspects. One reason is that the BRICS started about 15 years ago, but will now be expanding, and it looks like they'll put the de-dollarization agenda, which is usually talk left, walk right. Usually it's rhetorical grievances against world finance, against the World Bank and IMF, against the US dollar, against the SWIFT system, of course, and they'll be joined in arguing for some sort of alternative by the likes of the petrodollar origins in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, as well as Iran and Kazakhstan and Bahrain and Egypt and Algeria and Nigeria and Indonesia, a big coal country, as well as a few others that aren't quite so carbon addicted and tyrannical, like Argentina, that maybe even Venezuela, maybe Mexico, Nicaragua. There's talk of Turkey even, but now these are very interesting problems for us all, especially for the sort of independent left that is very critical of these countries. And it's been especially heightened by the distraction of whether Putin would be arrested officially by a South African government agency that would obey the International Criminal Court warrant of arrest. And what they're trying to do is make a quick law, the government, to prevent that scenario by saying anybody who's the head of state is exempt from any arrest warrant. The war games that occurred even on February 24 this year, the 1 year anniversary of the invasion, did include Russia and China. And there are a couple of other controversies. The one that really shook up the country because it crashed the currency for about 4% was when the Russian frigate called the Lady R was exposed as having uploaded weapons from Cape Town, a naval port called Simonstown, according to the US ambassador, who was very blunt in saying South Africa is supplying Russia and therefore not neutral. And it's a very interesting question. We don't really know yet what was uploaded or even downloaded. There's, since the Wagner groups come up, they were in northern Mozambique, and South African troops replaced them in 2021, defending Total's oil facility against Islamic guerrillas. And it is said that those arms from Russia actually went there. We don't know yet, so we'll be looking for investigations. But the other crucial thing is whether South Africa's military gets closer. There have been visits, even in the last days, by military figures from South Africa, political figures who are somehow connecting themselves to the Russian elite. And in general, let's say a sort of tightening and a lot more anti-Western rhetoric from the ascendant wing of the African National Congress. Regrettably, they're joined by some Communist Party, to be maybe expected, but also the biggest trade union, the metal workers. However, I'd like to finish by quoting Zwelinzima Vavi, who, as soon as the Russians invaded, had this to say, quote, "Workers oppose all imperialist and sub-imperialist wars because at the end it is they that will die like flies in the streets, while those stoking hatred and wars are safe in their bunkers. Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your change. Oppose imperialism and sub-imperialism. Oppose illegal occupation of eastern Ukraine by Russian troops in the same way you opposed American countless invasions and demobilizations and mobilizations in the Middle East." So he's the main labor leader in the country, going back about 2.5 decades. So there is some hope that we can get a left presence, even though we have this problem of campism, one that I know is also a factor in Europe and the US. Maybe that gives you a quick snapshot of where we are as we mobilize to a BRICS from below, probably around the 18th to the 22nd, and a protest against Putin's arrival here on the 22nd of August.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, let's hope other South African speakers will show up. I really hope so, to the last moment. Yeah, we also got a speaker from Mauritius today. He wished to remain anonymous, but we know that he's committed to solidarity with Ukraine. I think he will probably mostly speak about his personal problem with campism in one of the parties in Mauritius. So please, the floor is yours, if you hear us.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Please.
Okay, so my background is that I was a member of a local party, Marxist party, called Lalit here in Mauritius, which from commenting on the previous meeting, Denis Pilash told me he was familiar with them. And so I resigned last year from that party because they adopted a pro-Russian stance on the invasion. And well, the problem in Mauritius is that since the 1980s, there has been significant depoliticization of the population, which means that although all parties are nominally left-wing here, we have only one and two, only two parties that are actually left-wing and actually working to build solidarity internationally. But from the biggest organization, which is called Résistance et Alternative, I haven't seen much declarations on Ukraine other than like they condemn the initial invasion, but I haven't seen any more declarations. The organization in which I was a member of, however, did take. It was not exactly openly pro-Russian, like they did not say that the invasion was good openly, but they adopted a campus line in which they repeated the usual lines of of calling Euromaidan a coup, of claiming that Ukraine was attacking Russian speakers in the Donbass, and so on. So this was a really, even if they are not openly saying we are pro-Russia, it was effectively pro-Russia, and they have refused to accept any criticism from concerning this stance. So I resigned last year, and other than that, it is difficult to gauge how much support for Ukraine or for Russia there is in Mauritius, because again, we are very depoliticized society, which means that there are no like census opinion polls concerning this. Although sometimes on social media you do see one or two people adding like pro-Russian comments on posts on local media regarding Ukraine, regarding the war. But other than that, it's very like almost nothing. There is almost nothing on like in terms of local social movements. Although I would need to precise that our government, although it is conservative and quite like close to the Chinese and Russian governments, they have condemned the invasion at the UN, at the UN vote, and the foreign minister did say that he was disappointed by China and India refusing to condemn Russia. So this is quite a positive development.
Okay, if that's all, thank you very much. Okay, we, as I said, we thought we're gonna have a speaker from Mali, but I don't see him yet, hopefully yet, and other speakers from South Africa as well. So maybe we can start with the discussion. Anyone who has any questions or comments to our guests, I especially encourage our Ukrainian friends if they want to intervene in the discussion. So please raise your hands, guys, if anyone wants to ask something, our panelists about something. Anastasia, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anastasia. I actually had more of an input to share than a question to ask because I'm Ukrainian myself, and it's my first meeting all of you. And I'm sincerely amazed by all your efforts to stay in solidarity with Ukraine, and it honestly warms your heart, your time and dedication that you put into this issue. It means a lot to us. And I'm living in Namibia, which is a country next to South Africa. And that's why I was invited to this meeting to maybe share also what's happening in Namibia. Like maybe my South African colleagues will be able like to understand what I'm saying also, because it's quite similar situation. Because Namibia, it's a huge country in Southern Africa that was formerly a colony of South Africa, and right now it's also like the politics is really similar to what's happening in South Africa. In the UN votes, they abstain, and they have two major arguments. What they say that first, it's because they have a policy of non-alignment with external conflicts, external war, and they say that we're going to stay neutral no matter what. But, you know, it's very selective, their policy of non-alignment, because if we would look at the conflicts, at the war between Palestine and Israel, and we would look at their voting, like Namibia's voting in this conflict, we would see clearly that Namibia is supporting and very active in supporting Palestine in this. So, you know, like there is already first discrepancy that they say in this conflict with Ukraine, we're non-aligned and neutral, but in some other contexts, we will vote and make sure that we are heard. And of course, this is happening because they had some ties with Russia. It was happening during the struggle for liberation when Namibia was fighting for its independence, and Soviet Union was helping Namibia get this independence and helping with ammunition, with support, with soldiers. And Namibians are really like taking this narrative into today's life and say like, where has Ukraine been before? We have been supported by Russia, but they forget that Soviet Union was 15 countries. It was not only Russia, and that Ukraine was also supplying ammunition, but they have successfully forgotten about that. So there are many things that are happening. And of course, there is a big Russian embassy in Namibia that is making negotiations that they will supply gas, supply stolen Ukrainian grains, to stop the inflation, and they make sure that Namibia is their reliable partner, and that's why they're not supporting Ukraine as we would like them to. And we as activists like me and other Ukrainians in the region, we're trying like to raise awareness about the war in Ukraine and tell the truth, tell people what's happening in real life instead of like the propaganda that is happening from some also media. And from Russian embassy, we have been doing a Ukrainian film festival to show our prominent movies, to have panel discussion after this, like to talk about how propaganda in movies like affects people. We have been inviting the ambassador of Ukraine to South Africa to come to Namibia, because she's also responsible for Namibia, to come and talk like how war affects Namibia, and the war not because of Ukraine, but because of Russia it's happening, like to also change the wording because it's very important. We have been doing like musical concerts, demonstrations, like when the war just started, a lot of exhibitions with the most like famous pictures that I guess all of you have seen all over internet. So, you know, like we're trying in Namibia to like go from like soft power perspective, from cultural perspective, to show them that like we're also people, even though we're 10,000 kilometers, we're people like you, and we're also fighting for our independence. It's Russia who invaded us, and we're protecting our territories like you were protecting your territories, Namibians. And like Namibia is saying that they're a land of brave, and Ukraine is also like showing that we're super brave people. That's why we're trying like to bridge these two narratives and show that like we're similar in this regard. So I just wanted to share that like in countries that are so resistant to support Ukraine and they're kind of supporting the war, we're trying like on this example in Namibia to do it from cultural side to like share with people like our history, our story, to get them know more about us, and of course become more empathetic. And when people become more empathetic, they want to come back home and like read more about Ukraine, read on the news and know what's happening, and then like donate money or like, I don't know, like help their friends or like do something like spreads the truth. And that's how like we see some like slowly some shifts are happening like with young people. They were like, oh my God, I didn't know the truth, but like now thanks for sharing. Now I want to like come rebuild Ukraine. I'm gonna like plant a sunflower in my garden and all of this. It's very sweet of them. So like, step by step we're trying to do this, but of course on a bigger political level not much has changed, but we're not giving up and we're trying our best. So yeah, if you have any questions to me, I would gladly answer. But yeah, thank you so much for all your efforts and thanks so much for the attention.
Thank you. That was very insightful. Yeah, I think there will be questions. Yeah, I guess. Okay, John, and then Artem, please.
Good morning from here in Oakland, California. I'm John Ryman with the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign. And I have several questions about the Wagner Group, which I've been reading is becoming increasingly active in Africa as a whole. Number one, I'm interested, I've heard that they've been involved in mining and protecting the mining companies and also different governments. And I'm curious, to what extent are they getting independent financing? That is to say, independent of Russia and Putin. That's my first question. My second question is, to what extent are people in Africa, I'm not just ordinary people, aware of the Wagner Group's activities? How are those activities perceived? And also, does that impact people's views of what's happening in Ukraine? So those are my questions.
Okay, thank you, John. Artem, and then Dennis.
Everyone, I'm Artem from Social Movement. I'm trade union activist, Ukrainian. I saw the message about the idea of agenda for today, and it was some updates on the situation in Ukraine. And maybe I'll use this opportunity to mention one detail which I think is important. We as Ukrainian leftists, we're trying to use this world attention to the situation in Ukraine, also to support our comrades in different parts of the world. And I had a meeting with maybe some also people who present on this call with some our friends with trade union activists who fled from Belarus, and also with some people. I don't know, we are making this camera recording, so maybe I will stop here. So some of them, as you know, some trade union activists in Belarus are now into the jail because of their trade union activism, which is not impossible to exist according to Lukashenko's view on the civil society and trade unions. And also we had some meetings with people who support movement of feminists of Iran. And I mentioned these two parts of the world because I heard from them the same request to us, to Ukrainian socialists, to support their demands to expel to these countries from ILO. And as you know, in this June will be, maybe you know, will be a Congress of International Labour Organization, where these people like Iranian trade unionists and Belarus trade unionists are asking to support their demand to expel their countries from ILO, because for dictators, it's also an opportunity to imitate labor movement, which may be controlled by them, and to show the face of social dialogue inside of the country. And it is also one topic which I wanted to put as given an answer, how to support Ukrainian workers and how we can support other trade unionists in different countries who asking us to support while using this platform of our solidarity. Maybe you will have some ideas how can we make campaigns in our countries to support friends from all over the world. Maybe you also can rise up something on this topic, and maybe we can create some common statement, common, I don't know, message to the ILO Congress of trade unionists and leftists of different countries.
Yeah,
thank you.
That's also a good idea to use. Dennis, please.
Hello, and thanks for bringing this meeting up, because I think it's one of the most important dialogues and discussions we should have, like the people of Ukraine being subject to this criminal war of aggression of Russian imperialism, and the peoples of Africa who had been historically and who are still subject to numerous imperialisms and neocolonialisms that exploit these countries and also stir up military conflicts here. So actually, there's a lack of general knowledge both here in Eastern Europe about the plight of colonized peoples in the so-called global South, and as well as in corresponding regions there about what's the speciality of Central Eastern Europe and the history of Russian imperial ambitions and Russian imperialism. So part of this was already mentioned by Anastasia about this perception of modern Putinist Russia that is obviously a reactionary, authoritarian, gangster capitalist regime as some kind of here and only here to Soviet Union. Let's leave the question about what Soviet Union actually was, but for many peoples in Africa, Latin America, and Asia that were fighting for their liberation from colonialisms. At that point, USSR was like at least a temporary ally. And yes, it's perceived as if it was Russia, only Russia, erasing all the contribution of Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and so on, and all other republics. And actually, the contribution not just to support their decolonization efforts and their struggles for liberation, but also constructing different engineering structures there. It was enormous also contribution of Ukrainian Soviet engineers and workers. And it should be also explained, as well as there is a general lack of understanding that Russia used to be and still is one of these white colonial powers. And actually what Russia is doing now, also via the Wagner Group, is something very akin to very primitive 19th century type colonialism, with a mercenary army looting the national resources of these countries and brutally killing the local population. So again, it should be many people in Africa, they have this legitimate anger on other traditional colonial powers, on British, French, Belgian, and other colonialisms, and their continuation in the modern day Western neocolonialism. But they should also take into consideration that Russia and China, when they try to portray themselves as some kind of counterbalance to these Western colonizers, they propose nothing better. Actually, they often come with, especially Russia, come with this old school colonial techniques. And again, it's quite important to bring in this similar, very specific, but still very similar patterns of peripherality that we are living through in our regions. And this is why our journal called Commons, even in Ukrainian, launched this project of the dialogue of the peripheries, when we try to amplify and bring in the voices both from Ukraine and the general region to abroad, and from the so-called primarily from the so-called global south to our people, to understand that we are actually in many cases dealing with a very similar challenges, with legacies of different empires, with current imperial struggles, with problems, for instance, of the indebtedness and debt, this challenge of debt relief. I think that we are now in our organization, Social Movement, Социальный Рух, demanding the cancellation of Ukrainian foreign debt. And this is a very pressuring issue for millions of people throughout the world in their own countries. And in general, that we need to bring in this solidarity of peoples from below. And this is why I'm so grateful for all our speakers who spoke about their own experience in Africa. And maybe I'd ask a question to the speakers from South Africa. So our journal at some point has translated one of Patrick Bond's articles on BRICS and this sub-imperialism tendencies. So I have a question from two parts. The first one is about the current situation in the South African government. It seems that Cyril Ramaphosa, the person who started as an anti-apartheid trade unionist leader and ultimately become a capitalist shareholder who actually unleashes the police over the Marikana miners and leads to the infamous massacres there. It's a clear, this manifestation of the degradation of the former the leadership of the former liberation movements in many places. So whether you see some potential for some genuine new left-wing anti-capitalist movements that would challenge already this very pro-capitalist, pro-oligarchy regime that is like done in the name of and via these justifications. This is some continuation of the legacy of African National Congress. And the second one is about the general perspectives of the BRICS. As Patrick has mentioned, that it actually tries to expand, but it seems that already inside this very loose alliance, there is too many contradictions between different countries, and their level of development is also quite contradictory and uneven. So whether this type of conjecture between these powers, it's really lasting, whether it can persist given all these contradictions inside, or it's something very like situational, ad hoc, made in one moment in history that will be irrelevant in a couple of decades. Thanks.
Thank you. Fabio, please.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. Briefly, one suggestion for Anastasia from Namibia. Let me tell you, there is a group of trade unionists that are being persecuted by a Chinese company in Grossing. I think maybe if you contact them, they will help this struggle to bring solidarity with you, bring about solidarity with Ukraine. If you want, I can put you in touch with them.
Yeah, please.
Great. And Ayman, let me ask you, I understood perfectly that the Janjaweed leader, Hemedti, is together with Wagner stealing the gold from not only Sudan, but other countries in Africa. But the other group, the other, let's say, mafia is this Al-Burhan that is together with the Chinese corporations making business with the oil that comes from the south. So both of them, from the point of view of the Sudanese working class, are two enemies, right, that are fighting one against the other. But I would like to know what's the position of Al-Burhan regarding the invasion of Ukraine. Did Sudan take a stand as government regarding that, or they are neutral? This neutrality that is instrumental for Putin invasion. And Patrick, hello, you sent a PDF. I opened it in my mobile, but I cannot keep it. I don't know what happened. And I was interested in having it to share with friends here in Brazil. Thank you, people.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Please raise your hand. If not, I have some questions, maybe not comments this time, but questions to some of our speakers. First of all, I would like to echo Patrick's question about the two paramilitary groups in the Sudan war now. I mean, Ayman, can you just say how? Because we in our media we hear all the time that either the ruling generals are connected to Wagner Group, or they say that RSF is more connected to the Wagner Group. What's the role of the Russian imperialism on this both sides of this conflict? That's one thing. I would also ask either Desmond or Patrick, because Desmond said about this possible situation that if Putin shows up in South Africa, he might be prosecuted. Because first, South Africa said they won't issue a warrant of arrest against Putin. Then they changed their attitude, at least verbally. So what do you think? There are any prospects that this is really going to happen if he's going to show on a BRICS summit, or is it just some kind of a game by the South African authorities? And I just must say I really appreciate Anastasia's speech, because it was very interesting to hear about the situation in Namibia. I'm very interested in all possible voices from Africa we can hear. And I would ask you a question. If you said about this neutrality that the Namibian ruling party is trying to at least show in the public discourse, that it is not really so radical as they presented in the public discourse. So are you aware of any of the SWAPO's ruling party, either any of the officials had any like more pro-Russian stance? Did you see something like that? And is there any difference between at least this ideals towards neutrality in different communities in the country? I mean, especially in the white community, the Germans, the Afrikaners, and the British. So that's my questions. And let's say like Ayman, Anastasia, and Patrick or Desmond can answer. Ayman, please.
Thank you so much for giving me the chance to answer and reflect on the questions raised. I would like to emphasize that the military, by military, I mean the Sudanese armed forces that led by General Al-Burhan and the militia that led by Hemedti. Both of them were have committed the genocide in Darfur for several years back, that they were involved heavily. But recently, they were two rivals competing of gold stealing, smuggling, and having the deals of weapons with Putin. And it seems that with the help and augmentation of Emirates, the militia have been playing a dirty role among each others, that they have won the relation or the ties between them and Putin have advanced very much with and provided. It was like a deal of gold in exchange of weapons, and that is how the militia become very strong and recruited so many personnel, mounted to 100,000 soldiers. In the other hand, that we have General Burhan with the what we call the Security Council of the Bashir government, which is in act now as a ruling government in Sudan. They were very much involved in human rights violation and genocide and so many dictatorship that the revolution of the 2018 have started against this formation in the first place, and that is why as revolutionaries and as activists, we condemned both of them, both of the organizations, both of the militias, both of the militaries are involved in jeopardizing the rights of the civilians and the democracy pathways that we are working for and we are demanding for. And that is why Al-Burhan is not that much better than Hemedti. They are, both of them, they were involved, and both of them, we are calling for them to find their destiny and to be ousted from power in Sudan. This is at one hand. The very serious issue, and that's why I am emphasizing on Hemedti, because it is continuing now, and we have seen in so many other African countries that the militia, the Wagner militia, is replacing African governments with militia governments. And this is what is now happening in Sudan. And this is what we are resisting not to happen in my country, because I know very well if the militia win the war or set into the government, then it will be, maybe we need more 60 years to oust the militia. But that is why now it is time, we need the solidarity of the whole world, of all international organizations, or international community, to support Sudanese not having both of these entities into power. Rather, the power should be handed over or should be gained by the civilian government in Sudan for the sake of the human rights preservation, stop of the war, and humanitarian aids. And continuation of the democratic path that we have started in 2018. This is in one hand, and on the other hand, this is a replacement, or this is a continuation of new colonization in Africa, and this is what I believe that Putin or Wagner or whomever, they wanted to steal just the resources from Sudan or from any other government, regardless what is happening to the public. And this is the same situation continues, the same sufferings, the same killing, the same everything. The picture is the same. And that is why now it is time for us to resist all form of colonization that is targeted to our country, from Putin, from Emirates, from all the allies of this militia, or from this invasion that we are facing. And we know very well that now people are signing like short-term agreements for having ceasefire. But this during the ceasefire, we are receiving militias coming from West Africa to Sudan, and that's why it is not a ceasefire or not any kind of having humanitarian aid to get in the country, but more militias to get in the country and more fights. And that's why we need an everlasting solution, and we need the solidarity, strong decision, strong positions from everyone to condemn what is going on and preserving the Sudanese people or protecting Sudanese people from what is going on now in Sudan, from both sides, being the militia or the army.
Thank you. I'll let just in a moment. I'll just let Anastasia speak, and our rest of our speakers, our South African and Mauritius friends. But just one thing I want to mention: I don't recognize, obviously, because there's many people here. All of you. If there are any other people from the African continent who would like to share their experience, you're more than welcome, and please do so. So, Anastasia, please.
Yes, thank you very much for your questions. If I remember them correctly, one about SWAPO, second about neutrality. So I'll try to be concise and tell you the most interesting things. Well, SWAPO is like the main party in Namibia, like governmental party that was fighting for the independence, and many see in Namibia them as like founders of the nation, and the current president is of course head of SWAPO, and of course the politics is very pro-Russian, because they're like, even SWAPO is sponsored by Russians, and we see like some evidence, and like we can see it even in newspapers. But there are a tendency, like more and more, which actually is making me happy, that like young generation does not want to follow SWAPO course anymore, because they're fed up with, like, of course, internal things like corruption, nepotism, and all of these things that are actually suffocating Namibia and doesn't let it develop faster than it's happening right now. Because, for example, I will give you an idea what's happening in the capital. There is a huge hospital in Katatura area. The hospital is governmental, in public one, in a very horrible conditions, and people are dying because nurses and doctors basically don't have material to save patients. So it's very bad. And across the huge hospital, SWAPO built like absolutely enormous SWAPO headquarters that is bigger than any other building in the capital in the whole country. And it's like absolutely huge building across the hospital with the golden statue of the current president, the one that like no, not the current president, but the first president of Namibia that liberated the country. And it's located like right across the hospital. So, you know, like when people see it, they get fed up with the current party, and they say like, no, we as young generation, we don't want to vote for that. And we see things differently, because it's kind of similar to what Ayman also said, that like we do not represent what our government is currently saying. We have different views, and that's why things are slowly changing, but not as fast, because as you know, like as in all countries, young people don't tend to go to the elections that much, and that's why we still expect the shift in the current internal affairs, but it's not going to happen that fast. Unfortunately, SWAPO is supporting Russia. Russia is supporting SWAPO due to historical ties and due to current interests. And about neutrality, it's like part of their constitution. They really wrote it in their constitution that we want to stay neutral and be non-aligned with all the conflicts that are happening around us. But if we like divide the population, as you said, like local population and like German Namibians, white population, the views are a bit different, because local population is scared a lot to have to say something against Russia. Even if you see when media is commenting something and posting something about supporting Ukraine, everyone is saying, no, please, we cannot even defend ourselves against Botswana. If they try to invade us, we're not going to survive. So we not want to interfere in the conflict of this high level, because we will not be able to resist to Russia. So they're scared, and like, of course, because of lack of proper education, they do not understand the implications of what they say, and they scared, and they like follow with the swapper politics. German Namibians and like white population expats, of course, it's a bit different story, because Namibia was also colonized by Germans, and German Namibians, they totally understand what's happening right now in Ukraine, because they have been there, done that, and like they have never forgotten what was happening. And of course, they try, like they come to the demonstration, they come to the events, they write supportive comments, but it's not enough. It's not this critical amount of people that would make a change and would make and would be noticed. So that's why we really need to educate the local population about what's happening, and that Russia is not going to invade them. That's why we're trying to affect local population. We having already the support of German Namibians. We try to affect those groups to have like at least critical amount to be seen by the government. So I hope I have answered your questions, and
extensively. Thank you very much. Okay, so our South African comrades, you want to comment on, answer the questions that were raised towards South Africa?
Well, I could perhaps start, and Des has that on-the-ground experience working directly with the Ukrainians. I'm apologetic because our internet is very weak, and one reason is that our electricity system is sometimes down half the day, and that, plus perhaps some of the damage done economically because of South Africa's turn to Russia, may result in the ruling party, Denis, being voted out of power, which will be about April next year, the next election. And if that happens, what would probably result is they will make a coalition with a rabidly pro-Putin party called the Economic Freedom Fighters. So everything Denis said was correct about the neoliberal nationalism, our ruling party, and the ruler, Cyril Ramaphosa, being a neoliberal nationalist, but in that third worldism, and also because a Russian oligarch, Viktor Veksterberg, who has a manganese mine, is funding our ruling party, the African National Congress. So it could get even worse next year if the Economic Freedom Fighters are the coalition partner. But it might be that the African National Congress is thrown completely out of power, as has happened in most of the big cities, on and off. There's a lot of fluidity. One of the other interesting facets, I put some things in the chat box because John asked about Wagner Group. They actually lost an important battle in northern Mozambique in September 2019. They lasted about 10 weeks as the main mercenary group that was essentially supporting the Total Energies facility that I mentioned, a $20 billion facility to take natural gas or methane gas, the third largest field in the world. So the Islamic guerrillas were very tough on the Wagner mercenaries who couldn't operate in that jungle setting. And so at least a dozen of their troops were in many cases beheaded. So they ran away. So that, I don't know if that's the only case in Africa where a local guerrilla force, it's an Islamic extremist force, but they are in a sense demobilizing our fossil fuel sector, including South Africans who were there. So it's a complicated situation. I put some links there. For more general links between South Africa and the Russian sort of controversies and Ukraine, I've just put another link, which is Daily Maverick, which tends to be sort of liberal and Western centric. There is also, and maybe Des will have some other ideas, to me, a couple of other curiosities. The sanctions, I want to really hear from Ukrainians and others who are expert. The sanctions that hit just a year ago, building up and by May last year, peaking with something like $650 billion of the Russian central bank and the oligarchs' assets frozen, had an impact here. And one reason is that the BRICS Bank, the BRICS New Development Bank, which is a ostensibly $100 billion bank with potential capitalization, but it's 1/5 owned by Moscow. So the Russians have had a few loans. They've been classic corrupt loans with some nepotism. But the BRICS Bank decided that their loyalties lay with the credit rating agencies in New York. And sensing that the SWIFT and the financial sanctions and the economic pressure on Russia would be profound, the BRICS Bank actually said, we will join the sanctions. That was even on March 4. That was not only the BRICS Bank, but the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And another source of sanctions was a $700 million write-down. And any of you who correspond with Russians would know there's mail.ru is one of their main internet companies, and that was owned by a South African company called Prosus. It's now headquartered in Amsterdam. And their main source of wealth was a major share in Tencent, the biggest company in Asia, the Facebook and Twitter equivalent. So we're seeing a sort of transition of intercapitalist networking into this high-tech field and finance with all the contradictions. The one other company just to mention is Barlow World, which is a South African company long established, which had a very profitable Russian heavy equipment, kind of wholesaling and some retailing. And they've had to work in a Chinese connection. So as we're understanding these sanctions, it may be one of the areas, in addition to the kind of protests that Des was doing against the war games and that we've had here in Pretoria, in Cape Town, where good Ukrainian folk here in South Africa have been active. But I'm curious what you think. Are there areas where you're encouraging the breaking of intercapitalist connections between countries you're working in? Is the sanctions piece of this part of your vision of solidarity? We are simply too inexperienced with those three exceptions. And then, as I said, the main worry is that the Russians had at one point done Rosatom nuclear deals, but our activists stopped that, but have all kinds of connections to our ruling party, including very, very important financial connections, which I've just put a link on. So curious to see what you would think. I'm sure, Des, you've got some other thoughts about concrete ways to build up solidarity as well.
Yeah, sorry, Patrick, I was going to say that we should plan some sort of action. The BRICS is coming, then we should have an action in every country of the world, just to show a sort of unity amongst the movement. And probably pick a day when the BRICS are here, 22nd, you said, of August. So we can have that all over the world. That will catch media attention. And we all push for one thing: stop the money. Stop the money, you stop Putin. Stop the money all over the world. And it's easy for them to stop the money because at the moment, Putin is still getting the money from the oil. Stop the oil, stop the money. And I think we have to use every resistance to put pressure on Putin. If we can do that, I think, yeah, it'll be something that's not been done as much as what we'd like to be done from civil society all over the world.
Could I just say, right on. Des, let me ask you as well, not just stop the money, but there's also about stop the nostalgia. And I think it was Lisu, one of the people on the chat, asked whether the old historic Soviet solidarity with especially South Africa's liberation movement, the African National Congress, is that a very durable factor? And maybe Des, who has such long-term sensibilities about the prestige, certainly the prestige of the Soviet Union, but that did include the Ukrainian component, where especially Odessa was a site where training of guerrillas occurred in the early 1960s. So I can send more information about that. So it's not, as Anastasia said, it's not correct to say that because the Soviet Union helped the African National Congress, there is a debt from the ANC to Vladimir Putin, given especially that one of the things that we always find appalling is how Putin uses Lenin as his scapegoat for saying this is why we're invading Ukraine. So Des, what do you think? The politics, are we able to call out this sort of talk left, walk right nostalgia or third worldism that has made, when really what's going on, I think, is a Russian oligarch, Viktor Veksterberg, who's bought a big chunk of the ruling party?
I think we have to call them out. I don't think we need to worry about the debt that's owed, because if that was the case, then we should have gone after the World Bank and all these loans that have been given that created debt in South Africa, and also the reparation that the West owes the global South. So we shouldn't worry about the debt owed to Russia, to Putin, in fact. You know, he's done nothing to really assist us. I think we have to put enormous amount of pressure, and that can be done. We should not be afraid to speak up. In any case, most of the people that had been sheltered during the Soviet Union, most of them are no longer alive. So I would say that the younger generation, the likes of the EFF that's pushing for Putin, I don't think that the EFF understands the dynamics about humanity. And so I think it's up to us to really, you know, stand up and speak up. And I think if Putin does come to South Africa, let's not lose the opportunity to speak up and call him out on it, and call the investment of the Russian oligarch into the ANC. I think we must use the opportunity to do it, because that's where all the corruption goes through. Let's not forget that the majority of people in South Africa are living in poverty and unemployment. So they're not going to worry about the oligarch that's supporting Putin or the South African elites. I think it's time for us to stand up and be counted.
Thank you. I see our Mauritian comrade has hands raised, and then John.
Yeah, so I want, concerning international solidarity, like Mauritius, as I said, we are very depoliticized, but we have historically been at the center of many like nodes in international development. We have been colonized by the Dutch, the French, the British, and presently part of Mauritius is still under occupation by the United States and the British and Britain. So a lot of focus internally here tends to be on Western colonization, but at the same time, presently we are living in a situation where we are experiencing rising Indian and Chinese imperialism, and of course we are at the center. Although there isn't much awareness here, strangely, and in a similar way, there is like Wagner Group is not present here, but it has been operating very closely in Madagascar. Yet, despite this, there has unfortunately not been much awareness here. But I think it for those of us who are aware, we can knowledge about this situation can be grounds for building a solidarity movement that does not fall prey to campist traps, because we experience not only different imperialisms, but in many cases these are interconnected, because, for example, here Chinese and Western imperialisms work together. So often we have joint projects financed by France and China together, for example. So these are the interconnection of these imperialisms should very like makes it a necessity for us, for those of us who can, to build solidarity movements that not only don't fall prey to campism, but also like are able to bypass the like forced dichotomies that are put in place by various geopolitical rivalries. And to come to another point, but not completely unrelated, is that here, like although there has not been much like nostalgia towards the Soviet Union, because for example, in the 1980s we had and 1970s, we had a vibrant leftist movement, and it failed, part of which was due to the Soviets refusing to help them, promising to help them, but then refusing. And since then, like, there hasn't been much, really, any sort of Soviet nostalgia or explicit pro-Russian sentiment here. But at the same time, for example, the Russian embassy often tries to use anti-colonialism as a way to obtain support here. For example, the Russian ambassador has often made statements in favor of Mauritius, of the struggle of Mauritius to end the British and American occupation of the Chagos Islands. So in this case, like, we see an attempt, despite there being no pro-Soviet sentiment, to at the same time use presently existing anti-colonial sentiment to divert it towards pro-Russian stance. And this makes it, as I said, this makes it very important to build a strong and anti-campist solidarity movements.
Okay, thank you. I see John and Mary. I think just I want to say, I think that's the last questions and comments we're gonna have. I'll leave some space for our panelists to say final words, and we might have some announcements not related to this meeting. I just want to mention that Ayman, our Sudanese speaker, had to leave now. So John, please.
First of all, I put in the chat what I think is a very strong union-related resolution on Ukraine, and that's we're sending around here in the United States. And I hope maybe comrades in South Africa who were working with the unions would consider seeing if they could gain some traction, or if they could use that resolution. I have another question. The issue was raised about the role of the Soviet Union during the liberation struggles in Africa. And here in the United States, for the younger generation, just the very existence of the Soviet Union nowadays is almost lost in the mists of the distant past. It's like history. It has nothing to do with the present in their minds. And I'm wondering, in Africa, amongst the younger generation, people 16, 18, 20 years old, how much the liberation struggles and the role of the Soviet Union is in their consciousness, how much that affects how they see things today, including in relation to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, if it has any impact very much at all.
Okay, thank you, Mary.
Hello, can I say something? Can I participate?
Yeah, just but Mary raised her hand first, so Mary, and then
Go ahead, whoever.
Sure.
Oh,
no,
okay.
no, sorry. I'll wait.
No, if Mary's okay with that, please go.
I think first of all, the freedom is the best way that it affects us, because our country have not been free for more than 50 years. So if we weren't affected directly, our parents were, and our grandparents were. But the thing is, I'm not in favor of the Russian invasion to Ukraine. Not at all. No country, no one should be on top of another one and impose anything to them. That is my way of thinking. But I think that we are making a lot of, we are being very upset because of what is happening, especially because it's Ukraine and it's in Europe. Because, for example, other countries have been in war since 2011, and we don't seem to care about it. But that is not the point over here. Okay. I'm referring, for example, to Syria. I'm referring to what's happening in Gaza. And we keep letting that slide. And because it's countries that are allies to our imperialist countries, we don't impose sanctions to, for example, to the US, who has invaded lots of other countries for oil and for other things, right? My question is not, my point is not the Russians are right. My point is that we are trying to sanction and to ask, we are demanding for Putin to be arrested, which I agree, but we didn't do that with Bush. We didn't care about when Bush was doing that, because, you know, it's that country over there with probably lots of thinking, like poor and violent countries and Muslim countries, so we don't really care. And that is happening, but we are not imposing sanctions against Israel about what is doing to in that area of their neighbors. They are killing even young. And I'm not saying that the Russia is right or excused, because they are doing that to Ukraine and other countries are doing that to the other. I'm just saying that if we are talking about being fair and about being sanction someone because they are doing wrong, why aren't we doing it to all of them? Why are still having seats on the United Nations and G7 and so on and so forth, while they are oppressing and killing other countries, and then we are all getting together to discuss how Russians are the evil and all of those. And I'm not saying they are not. Attention, that's not my point. I'm just saying that it's very important for us to remember that when we were struggling against European imperialism, Russia was the one helping us. Okay, it was the Soviet Union, but as we do know, that's why we are all against the Soviet Union. Russia was oppressing the other countries, so the one who was in charge was Russia. As in the same way, when Portugal was colonizing Angola, Cape Verde, Guinea, and Mozambique, and all of those countries, the one who were doing all of the orders and the one who were saying everything were the Portuguese, right? When the actions of Mozambique or Angola officially was being dictated by the Portuguese. I'm not saying that the Russian is right. I'm just saying that we should think very open about that. And when I say very open, I'm saying about sanction. I do think that we should sanction Russia, yes, but we should sanction Israel also. We are thinking only about one country and what affects us directly as white people living in Europe, and how it affects the economy of the US, because they are changing the power of the money in the world. I just think that is the question that we should be thinking also. I think that we are doing a very imperialist type of speech. But when we exclude other things, when exclude other things like Israel doing that, or US doing that, especially when US do it, because US have done it with lots of countries, and we seem not to care. But when it's Ukraine, which is a very important economic for border and economic for Europe, we are very upset about it. And I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm just saying that we are just focusing on that because that is what matters to us as white people living in Europe and US. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. But I think that's not really the crowd, the right crowd you were speaking to, because we agree, I guess, that both people who are here, that all the imperialisms are not good. We are focused on Ukraine because we, today that's where from our people who we work with are from. It doesn't matter. Doesn't mean that we are not interested in solidarity with Syria. There are people here who are active in Syria solidarity, for example. Okay, Mary, please.
Yeah, I do want to carry on from that, though. Thanks, Lisa. I'm surprised there are any criticisms there. I mean, I think there is, first of all, thank you very much, everybody, for a great discussion. I'm really sorry that Iman is now not here for what I'm going to say, because if you look at what we've been saying, some great slogans, stop the money. What about the inter-capitalist dealings? Our Mauritius friend talking about China and France working happily in Mauritius. The best example of this is Sudan, isn't it? Why do the Janjaweed become the rapid support forces with 20,000 soldiers and uniforms and all the rest of it? Because of the support of the EU. And it hasn't been mentioned in the discussion, the Khartoum process. The EU paid vast money in there to build this militia from the Darfur genocide force it was, up to what it is now, capable of fighting the other side, the army, which also gets money. And these are cooperating, aren't they, with the export of gold to Russia. There was the time when Putin's Russia was described as the gendarme of Western capital, wasn't it, at the time of the Chechnya War, when the West supported Putin bombing Chechnya into the ground. These are links we have to make. So if you talk about Sudan, and it's such a shame Iman isn't here, nobody is there to support Sudan. We make appeals that those two warring factions, the two sides of an army paid for by the EU, by Russia, by China, by the Wagner forces, and all the resources of the country being stolen to pay for that, we make appeals, but we're denying the fact that the EU has paid. The EU arms the Emirates and the EU arms Saudi Arabia. So what are the links between the anti-campus fight we're having, which is really important all the time, relentless. I'm in Berlin, relentless all the time, fighting, collecting individuals who are willing to see Russia as an imperialist colonialist power. We want to fight Russian colonialism. But in Sudan, if you also look at how Network News is reporting it, they're just waiting. Very often a day goes by and there's no mainline reporting on Sudan. They wait for the army to defeat Hemeti, or for Hemeti to push the army into the corner, and they will call it stability. So these discussions, this is the discussion to Dennis and everybody else there in Socialny Ruk, which we mentioned when we talk about we need an alternative security architecture in the world. But what are we now going to say about this? It is true that the criminals sit in the United Nations, Syria is the best example of that, and make sure that things keep going on the way they are. So my question mainly is on Sudan, but unfortunately Iman is now not here, and on our attitude to the big structures we make appeals to. How are we going to move on to the question of an alternative security structure, which we really need? Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Yeah, I think just we'll give the summary to summarize the discussion. Just give final words to our speakers, whoever wants to take the floor. Patrick, Desmond, or a Mauritius friend, please. Unfortunately, Ayman is not here, so.
Well, if the other comrades are quiet for a second, I'll just put in the chat where I think, John, to your question of where the sort of left residuals from the liberation struggle are, they've been so battered, and we're seeing our trade union movement split, including the independent left unions. And part of it is indeed the question of interpreting foreign policy and whether the biggest union, the metal workers, their leaders continue to support Putin. But the question of whether the sensibilities in especially the massive urban youth, the rural folk, stay with the liberation struggle, because so many compromises were made. I've put them together in the book. I've just put the link to in the chat box. I think the rise of unemployment to extraordinary levels, officially about 35, but when you count people who've given up, close to 45%, and youth unemployment well over 50. You've got also the massive inequality and decapitalization. The wealthy white folk are taking their money out of here as fast as they can, and the general breakdown of services. I think there's a sense that that deals that were done in this transition, partly because the Soviet Union had fallen apart, and there was that sort of sense that the South Africans, the state backed by Ronald Reagan, by Margaret Thatcher in that period of the late 80s, was just going to hold on forever. So the deals that were done to try to wedge white capital out from its support for the white state included so many compromises that lowered the standard of living and worsened unemployment and poverty and inequality, that even Nelson Mandela is often described by the younger generation, especially the student activists over the last few years, called Fees Must Fall, as a sellout. That phrase is often used. So I think actually this question of what is the prestige really still relates to a very small elite at the top. And most of the opinion polls would show a majority of support for Russia pulling out, for the Ukrainian sovereignty. So I don't think there's a problem of the mass opinion, and the liberal bloc and the capitalist bloc obviously are going to be very pro-West on this standpoint. But I think we are still struggling on the independent left to find the best ways to create solidarity. So this is one of those discussions. And if you do have anything you'd like to email me that I can toss in, including that union resolution, I'll be very happy. I know that Des is on the line, and he'll join me, because we always say when we leave off, we say Amandla, away to power to the people. But Des, you want the last word, or our comrade from Mauritius?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Well, I think that we will continue to show solidarity for the Ukrainians and stand up against the bullies, as well as the war in Sudan and the Palestinians, war that's been waged on them. I don't think South Africa can really call itself free if we are still having wars and people are still in prison in their own land. So we'll continue to fight, and we'll continue to stand together. That's critical and important. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, guys. If I think that we can slowly wrap up the discussion, because I see some people are leaving the meeting. The way it was a very interesting, but also a long discussion. So I just want to say I really hope we gonna manage to organize meetings similar to this as much as possible. I think we need to get back to Africa, possibly also soon, with other speakers who couldn't manage to be here today, or contacts we're gonna develop also maybe through this meeting, I guess. So thank all of you for taking part in this meeting, in this discussion. I really hope we're gonna be in contact and we can organize some other events, as Dennis mentioned in the chat about the debate organized by the Commons Spielne magazine, Ukrainian magazine, which is called Dialogue of the Peripheries, which I highly recommend to all of you, especially those who are interested in sending the articles from the global, let's call it the global South, and debating about solidarity with Ukraine and the possible dialogue between Ukrainian struggle, Ukrainian resistance, and resistance in other countries, also towards other imperialisms. Yeah, so I'm very glad we were here today. I don't know if Fabio is still here. He may. Fabio, if you're here, say yes.
Yes. May I say?
Yes. If you may. Yeah, of course. Yes. That's why I wanted to introduce Fabio to say a few words about the workers' convoys that's coming very soon to Ukraine. So come on, please.
Yes, brothers and sisters, I'm part of a campaign called Workers' Aid to Ukraine, which is sponsored by the International Labor Network for Solidarity and Struggle. It's a network of independent trade unions. We are active in building solidarity with Ukraine. Last year, we sent 2 convoys to Ukraine. And now we are preparing the 3rd one, which we hope it will work to have it in the end of next month. So as soon as I have more information, a manifesto, I'll send to you. Okay, just that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if you have any announcements you wanna share with us, yeah, please do so. But as Artem said about the actions towards help for the Belarusian trade unionists, John did mention the Ukraine Social Solidarity Campaign from US trade unionist declaration motion that you can use for your trade unions to get them in solidarity with Ukraine. But if you have any other announcements, please raise your hand. If not, I think we'll leave it at that. I'm very happy about this meeting. I was really hoping it's going to be interesting and informative, and it was. So as I said, I really hope we're gonna keep in touch, organize some other events, and hopefully come back to Africa as well, with also people from other countries. And if you are interested, of course, we try to organize those meetings once a month. And as I said at the beginning, the next one we'll soon inform about the date and time, but will be organized in June, and will be focused on Middle East in the context of solidarity with Ukraine. So I also think quite an interesting one. So hopefully see you, at least many of you there, and have a good day. Thank you very much for attending.
Okay. Thank you, Shimon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. Thank you.